Good afternoon, everybody. Hi. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Lindsay Adler. I'm a Canon Explorer of Light. And today I have a brand new topic for you that I haven't taught anywhere to anyone, so you get something exciting and new. What we're going to talk about is a term I totally made up, but I feel like it works. And the concept is in-camera compositing. So let me just show you what I'm talking about so this makes a little bit of sense. What we're going to do is I'll talk about the concept, how to plan your own shoots, and then I'm actually going to do a live shoot of this. What you want to keep in mind is even though I'm going for kind of a fashion shoot, you can also do this for a portrait shoot, you can do it for wedding, you could do it for fine art. Is this our music? I have a soundtrack. I wasn't expecting a soundtrack. I was like, am I supposed to act with this? All right, so let's jump right into this. Okay, so take a look at these next few photos and take a guess which one of these are which. So which ones are shot out on location, so outdoors, at a mansion, whatever it may be. Which ones are shot in the studio and which ones are composited, so done in Photoshop to make it look like they're on location. Ready? Okay, so we're going to take some guesses. I'm going to go through this. So is this location, composite, or studio? All right. Ready for the next one? Location, composite, or studio? Next one? Location, composite, or studio? Okay. I heard a little bit of everything. They're all done in the studio. And this is what I'm talking about with in-camera composites. So I think I'm pretty good at Photoshop, but I'm not a good compositor. I like to see the end vision in my camera. I like to be able to see, I feel the background, the direction of light is coming from here. Oh, and the background light is very soft. I want to match it. I have to actually see it. So what I want to take you through is how to shoot on a background in your studio space, but make it look like you've transported your subject to some exotic location. I will actually tell you how to get backgrounds that aren't expensive, how to build a scene like this. So I'll take you through this step by step. So first and foremost, when you're planning your in-camera composite, you of course have to find your background. This can be a background that you shoot, or you can use stock photography. Most of the images that I use, including the one that I have hanging up here in the background, are from Adobe Stock. And Adobe Stock, you're looking at something maybe $10 or so an image, maybe 20, kind of depends on what it is. And when you select this image, you want it to be approximately 4,000 pixels on the long side, like to give you enough information to put as a background. But what I'm going to talk about in a minute shows you it actually doesn't have to be that high resolution. So this image was only 4,000 pixels, but I was able to print it to 10, 12 feet and not be a problem. So you find your background, which also means now as you're out on location, on vacation, you see a beautiful background, you can bring that home and then put your subject there. All right, so first and foremost, you find that background. So the background I have here, this shot was shot in the studio, and it was an Adobe Stock sky background. And it was about 2,500 pixels on the long side. So this is an example of it not quite being large enough. So you pick it out, and then you have to print it. So this is the part that stops most people up, is they're thinking like, this is super expensive, why don't I just put it in Photoshop? Well, first and foremost, let's go the expensive but awesome route. If you have a Canon large format printer, the Canon Pro 4000, for example, prints 4 feet by however long your roll is. So I could do 4 feet by 100 feet if I wanted to. So I actually just did this. I bought the newest Canon printer and I print out several different backgrounds. The key though is to make sure it's a canvas or a matte surface because if it's shiny, it's going to reflect your lights. Okay, now let's go the cheaper route, but it's actually still pretty good. The cheaper route is this website right here. It's called Kate Backdrops. This background here, I think full size, I think that cost me about $220. But obviously I'm not using most of this background. So you can get a background that will work for in-camera compositing that'll cost you around $100. from their site. And then that code will give you 10% off. So covers, shipping and things like that. All right, so next up, people go, okay, this sounds cool. I like the idea of printing backgrounds, but then I print it and then I don't use it again and it's sitting around. I use these over and over again. And I use them where I change the color using gels. Some of them I'll have in sharp focus. Other ones I'll blur so it's not quite as in focus. So for example, these next 3 shots are all actually the exact same background. This one, ready? It's a cloud background shot in 3 different ways. One of them, I warmed up the white balance. Now it looks like it's a gold and orange background. The other one, I cooled it down. I added some pink purple. Now it looks like it's a purple background. So they're actually pretty versatile. All right, so what would trick someone into believing that you are actually shooting your subject on location, not compositing it, not shooting on a background? One of the key things, well, the 2 key things I think, thing number 1 is going to be your depth. If there's a foreground, middle ground, and background, or a narrow depth of field, that doesn't look photoshopped. It looks real. But the other reason that narrow depth of field helps you is if your background isn't super high resolution. So remember how I said you only need 4,000 pixels on the long side? You can actually do less than that. But if you're shooting at 4.0, just enough to soften it a little bit, you won't see pixels, you won't see noise, you're not going to see any problems you would have with a lower res file. So that's why most of the time I try to shoot f4, maybe I shoot at 2.8. It kind of just depends on, how close your subject is to the background. That's why this is not ideal. I'd like a little bit more depth if I had, because if I could bring my subject off that background maybe to here and shoot 4.0, it'll be nice and soft. It's just that hint of a background, and I don't have to worry about telling that it's fake. The next part I mentioned is foreground, middle ground, and background. That'll convince people that you're actually on location. So you shoot a wider aperture, but there's something a little bit blurry in the foreground and a little bit blurry in the background. It looks like they're there. So what I did, I printed this background out, and it's got kind of a fern forest feel to it. So I went onto Amazon, and I spent, I think it was like $15 on fake ferns. So we're going to put them into the scene, put them a little bit out of focus, make it look like the subject is actually there. All right, so taking a look, here is an example with the narrow depth of field. In this case, I was shooting at about f2.0, and notice how the background is soft, it disappears, so it looks a little more on location. And then here is the same concept as we're talking about. I'm building another version of this shot, fundamentally. It'll be different styling, but those are those same fake ferns in the foreground. Shooting again, this time it was f2.8. Makes it look a little bit more realistic. Okay, so depth of field, foreground, middle ground, and background, that tricks the eye. And then the next part that tricks the eye, of course, would be the lighting. So if you can mimic the lighting in the scene. So my recommendation is if you pick out a background that has a direction of light, like you can see there's sunset from this side, well then you put your light source from that side. Oh, yeah, and if it's a sunset, you make it warmer. You add a CTO gel. You make it very orange. That will trick the brain as well. So for example, this image was shot all in the studio. The subject was probably, 3-4 feet away from the background. And instead of using regular white light, like our daylight balanced strobes, in this case, I added a full stop CTO, which means it makes it tungsten, which normally you're like, oh no, you don't want tungsten light on the skin, but it makes it look like a sunset. So this was all done, again, in the studio, and this one was done with 2 different strobes. All right, so far, depth, so shooting at a wide aperture, having something foreground, middle ground, and background, that tricks the eye. Next up, your lighting, match the color of the lighting, the direction of the lighting, the quality of the lighting. And then the last part is the color in post-processing. Because here's how our brains work. If I put the subject on this really cool bluish green background, okay, you put them there, and then you light them, and they're all warm, normal skin tones, and the shadows on their face are neutral, you know that they weren't there. But if all of a sudden in post-processing, I cool down the white balance on the skin so they start to look kind of blue, and I desaturate the skin tone because that background is very desaturated, all of a sudden your brain goes, oh, they were probably there because the color on them matches the color in the scene. So that's how I approach the step-by-step for building these creative shoots. May I have my model come out for me? I think her name's Alexis. All right. So let's talk about what I have going on up here. So this is what I had in my head, what I'm thinking is, first and foremost, if I look at that background, there actually is kind of a directionality to the light, right? You see how it's a little bit glowier over there? Actually, I'm going to have you stand if that's okay. Let me just grab this out. No problem. Thank you. Thanks, son. All right, so if you look, directionality to the light from the right-hand side, it's not too strong, but it's basically top right. And if you notice, it's a foggy day or foggy night. It's very diffused light, which tells me it's got to be very soft light. So I want to have the softest light source possible. And so what that means is you need a big light source, you need it close, and you need it diffused. Those are all things that make your light softer. One of the key rules of lighting is that the larger the light source is relative to the subject, the softer the light, which basically means get a big light, bring it close, that's as soft as you're going to get it. So that's why you'll see our very first light up there is an extra large umbrella with diffusion. What's nice about these is they're easy to use for having them high up rather than really big octaboxes. Sometimes those are a little bit heavier and a little bit more difficult to wield. So that's why I often opt for these. Plus, if anyone has ever set up a 5 or 7 foot octabox, I feel like you know my struggle. They're impossible, and then you end up cursing in front of it. It's not good. So that's why I use the large umbrella from the side. What we're going to do is, right now it's pointed across the scene at me, which I think is going to be good, but we can vary it. So if I want it to look like there's a stronger directionality of light to the scene, I can point it at the background a little bit, and it'll brighten up the background on that side. Makes your brain think it's real. But if I think, oh man, that background's too bright, no problem. I'll rotate it back towards me. So let me see if I can find my camera over here. Great. What's that? I'm going to shoot at f4 and ISO 200. Okay, so let me talk about my camera settings real quick. So when I'm in the studio, I pretty much use the same camera settings all the time, but let me tell you the exceptions. So I'm going to be shooting, first and foremost, with a shutter speed of 1/200th of a second. And the reason I'm doing that is your shutter speed helps get rid of ambient light. So see all of this? This is a lot of light hitting my subject, and it does not contribute to this moody scene that I'm going for. So for that reason, 1/200th of a second is at my camera's sync speed to cut down on that ambient. Okay, so if you look at my shots, almost 100% of the time, 1/200th of a second. The next part would be my ISO. Most of the time for my ISO, I'm at an ISO of 200. The logic behind this is if I'm shooting at ISO 200, first of all, I know it's a lower ISO, so my file will be nice and clean, right? Not a lot of noise to it. But the reason I like to do this is as I'm shooting, and I look and I go, oh man, the picture's too bright, maybe, right? I can go from ISO 200 down to ISO 100. But if I'm at 100 and want to go down, I have to change my lights. Does that make sense? So I don't want to have to do that. So I start at 200 to give me the flexibility. And then the same thing, if I'm shooting at 200 and it looks too dark, I go from ISO 200 to 400. No problem, the file is still going to be nice and clean. So I'm shooting with the Canon EOS R today, and I'm going to shoot with the 50 millimeter 1.2 RF. It is crazy sharp and crazy beautiful. So if I were not shooting in such a bright space, instead of shooting 4.0, I might go like crazy wide open. Like I might actually go to say 1.8, maybe 2.0, because I know that it'll be nice and sharp. But at that setting here, I'm going to actually see ambient light. So let's just see so far where we're at. And I'm not going to meter. It's fine. Let's just see what it looks like. Yes. You're going to move that one? And what is that one? Thanks. Oh, okay. Let's give this a quick test. And oh, actually, can you face your body this direction? So this is going to be mostly our main light source. If I face her straight on, none of that light is hitting her face. So that's why I'm turning her towards the right of the frame. No, let's give this a test. And can I see the HDMI, please? Let's see. Maybe. Isn't another light firing? I feel like this one was. Yes, it was. Let's try that again. Do I need to do something different to make the HDMI work?
We have to plug it in.
Oh, so you just want me to do tethering? That's fine. I'll tether. Let's try that. By the way, I'm going to be shooting tethered into Capture One. This is what I use in my studio space. I love Lightroom, but it's not awesome with tethering, unfortunately. So Capture One just makes it easier. So let me test this again. It's fine. Don't worry. All right, so what I'm doing right now is let's just take a quick test. Let's make sure. Did this come in? Remember how I was talking about tethering? Let's make sure this actually works. One more. Okay, some of you are going to show up. Let's make sure. I think it's good. Okay, great. That's what I needed. All right, so let's try this one more time. Perfect. Okay, so far it's clearly not right yet, but I'm seeing I've got a nice soft light on her face. So let's go through the things that I think aren't working. I know the background's too dark, but it also doesn't have directionality. I'm going to feather that light towards the background more. So we're going to point it at the background just so we get a little bit more spill across. The next thing I'm looking at is those shadows on her face. Like that in a nice foggy scene, it wouldn't be like that, right? Because what happens is the backlit light bounces around a scene and it fills in the shadows. So I already know that I want to fill in the shadows somehow, which is going to be probably the job of this light. But the other thing is, if you actually look at the light on her face, to see how there's kind of these dark pockets of light in her eyes. It's not like she doesn't have that sparkle to her eyes. So I'm going to add a light just to brighten up her face just a little bit. So in the end, what I'm picturing is one light that gives the mood of the scene, a second light just to pop a little bit of light on her face, and then a third light that's going to fill in the shadows. In a perfect world, I'd have one more tool, but I didn't think they'd let me do it here. I'd have haze. I'd have a haze or a fog machine going, because if I had that in the scene, it would look even more like the background. They actually sell something called haze in a can or atmosphere in a can. It's really, really cool. And you can just, instead of filling up your whole room with a fog machine, you just give it a couple sprays and it gives a little bit of mist. The problem is you can't fly with it because I guess they're afraid it like blows up and stuff. So you have to actually ship it to yourself. All right, let me try this again. So you don't have to have that yet. Let's see this one. All right, I think it's going to be a little bright. Oh, wow, this tether. All right, let's give it a test here. See how we're doing? All right. It can go a little stronger, but if you show, can you do before after, Stephen, for me? Just flip through them. It's starting to brighten up her face a little bit. Okay? I think I can do a little bit more. So let's just brighten it up a little bit. Beautiful. Okay, so definitely looking a little bit better in her eyes, shaping her face a little bit better, but I still have those very not believable shadows. So that's going to be this last light. And the same thing, I'm sticking with a soft light source. The light on her face that I chose over there is a white beauty dish. A white beauty dish is soft, but it has a little bit more pop and contrast. I figured that might be a good face light because it would point the eye there if there's a little more contrast there. It says, look at the subject, rather than it being soft and she blends in. And then this light source, I selected as being something soft as well because I want the shadows to be invisible. I just want to lift them up. All right, so let me see. You can grab the gels after this. I just want to grab this. All right, let's give this a test. All right, let's turn this. Oh, I see why. He ran over there because his head wasn't working. That's a definite no. travel. Ooh, do you see what it's doing? I'm dialing it down, it's going up. Okay, good to know. Let me just test this for a second then and get this right. See how we're doing, making sure I really like it. Oh, hey, right, that one. Look back at me. You look beautiful. Okay, yeah, I think the last thing I need definitely will be this fill in the shadows. So what'll happen is once I turn this on, I'm gonna see how much I want to do in camera versus color grading in post. So when I change the mood of the scene, I do it in two places. I either do it through gels and white balance, or I come over to Lightroom and Capture One, and I'll add some color to the shadows, some color to the highlights. So as I look at this scene, it's all really, really blue. So it might be good for this fill light to have like a thin blue, maybe a little bit, like just a kick of blue. But if it looks too blue, then maybe white balance would be better. So let me test it out here. Let me just see. I'm going to cheat it a little bit while he's setting that up. So if you can see on my screen, what I'm going to do to make it more believable is I'm just going to bring down the white balance, making it cooler. You can see it a bit. And I'm going to desaturate just a little bit. So it already starts to look more like she was in that scene. So here's the before, and here's the after. It's not correct skin tone, but it makes it look real. All right, so let's try this. Okay, let's try this again. Is it on the right channel for me? Okay, let's see about this fill. And can you bring it back just a tad? Okay. No, hold on. Go down. Yeah, let's try it again. And that fill obviously doesn't look real. We need it to be a little more subtle. That's closer, right? That's much closer. So if I compare, can you pop back over there, Stephen? Go 2 before. So go up 2. That one. So that's the difference between with and without fill. And then can you click on the bottom shot and then reset the white balance only on the bottom one. So here is where the white balance was. And that doesn't look like she's there. But then do it again. Okay. So that is when I've cooled down the white balance, desaturated a little bit. Okay, so I've got my formula looking pretty good. I'm feeling it. But now I want to get the perfect shot. And I think I'm going to work on moving these ferns around so that they frame her in a more pleasing way. And I'm maybe going to go down just a little bit on the fill, just a teeny bit darker. All right, so let's see. Can you lower this one for me? Maybe put it in the front? Yeah, I think that'll be good. Minus this tape. See if that tape's visible. Okay, and I'll try a couple vertical as well. Let's see. Can you do this? Ooh, cool. Let's see. Kind of like framing her. All right. Let me test it. That is a sad fern. Let's see if we can fix that. I'll try. Okay. Let's see what else I'm thinking. All right. I like the mood, but not the pose yet. I want to give it a little bit of something to it. Do you think, can you find that board again or steal one? Do we have the board again? Yes. Okay. I'm thinking if she's out on location, there might be a little bit of movement to her hair. Like, I feel like that might make it believable as fog coming through. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece of cardboard and we're going to move it up and down to get some motion to her hair. Let me fix the pose. So right now, what I'm thinking is the way she's standing in the light is drawing attention to her midsection. It's not because it's big, it's just lit a lot. So one way I'm going to do this is, can you actually turn around towards the background just a little bit? Great. Can you pop up your right knee? Great. Perfect. And put your hand down on your thigh and then bend it just a little. Okay, so what all that did, to summarize, is before she's kind of doing this. Flat foot pushes the stomach out. And there's a lot of light hitting here. So by me turning her away from camera, it hides the bright spot, right? So it's not all lit. But then this is really flat and not interesting. So when you bend the knee closest to the camera, it creates this nice curve. I always do that, almost always, instead of the leg away from camera, because this makes someone broader and wider. So I bent this knee, but then it's curvy here and not here. So I leaned her forward a little bit, gives you nice lines to follow. And then instead of the arm straight against the side, I put it on top of her thigh. This elbow's straight and boring, so I had her bend it a little bit. So that's kind of my thought process. It makes a nice, interesting pose. Maybe not the most comfortable to hold, but you're doing a nice job. And then roll your shoulder forward just that way. Yep, perfect. Let me get a nice, all right. I know it's tight in there, Stephen. Give me a lot of blow if you can. I'm getting a little bit of wind. And this is so Stephen doesn't have to work out later on today. He already did this morning. But usually what I'll use when you have more space, I use a variable power floor dryer. You don't have to buy a special fan. They're like $40 at a home improvement store. And so when you're in tight spaces, you don't have to worry about not being able to fit in. And then I'll just turn it up and get some more flow to the hair. This looks great. Okay. I trust. You got this, Stephen. Oh, I saw a little floof. Oh, there we go. That was cute, though. And then can you do me one more favor? Can you look up more towards the corner of the light here? Yeah, exactly. I feel like she wouldn't be looking at me. I don't know, in this fairy tale forest. You got this, Stephen. You're doing good. Also, she smiled. That was really cute. Pointed the camera at you. So let me just get a couple shots side to side, and then we'll talk about a few more steps here. All right, go ahead. You got this. I'm thinking this one needs to come down just a little. All right, one more. Yeah, that's beautiful. And now eyes at me, chin towards me just a little. Okay, beautiful. All right, so let me give you a couple more tips for what's going on in my camera, and then we'll take a look at the post-processing. So how I work when I'm shooting is right now I have the face and eye tracking turned on. So what it does for the EOS R, specifically the mirrorless, is it finds her face, and then whatever eye is closest to the camera is what it locks on. So if you saw me as I'm shooting and changing my orientation, I don't actually have to change focus points or anything. It's finding the eye, so it makes it much faster. And then the other thing, I'm shooting at 4.0. I would probably shoot this a little wider. I really am bad at focusing wide open. I don't know if anyone else is like that, but I feel confident I can regularly nail shots at 1.8 now. So normally I shied away before I had face and eye tracking. So I ended up at an ISO of 250, f4, 1/200th of a second. I shot at a daylight white balance, but while I was tethered, I actually cooled it down. All of these images are raw, so even though I am changing the white balance and changing the color, if I change my mind, it's not a problem. Okay, so real quick, before I go on to post-processing, does anyone have any questions about this shooting part so far? And then I'm going to show you some color grading. Am I that amazing? No? I was stellar. Yes. Great question. Do I normally shoot that close to my subject? No. Ideally, I would not feel like it was going to fall off a ledge. No, I would say typically for a scene like this, what I would usually do is have my subject maybe 5 or 6 feet off the background if I can, because then it gives it a little bit more separation. The other reason more depth from the background is good is maybe I want to add a highlight in the background and actually light it. If they're right up against it, I can't get a light in there without actually hitting them as well. So I usually 4 to 6 feet from the background, and then my actual distance from the subject is 6 feet-ish. It depends on the lens that I'm using. Maybe for this scene, instead of a 50, I'd actually go with an 85. But I chose a 50 so I didn't have to stand on a, something out here. So probably for this, I would have chosen 85. Anything else? Okay. You keep holding your questions here. Next up, let's come over and I'll show you a little bit of what I'm thinking in my post-processing. All right. So once again, to reset to where we started. I don't hate this, but if I weren't going to change the color in camera, what I would do is grab a blue gel. So Stephen, can you grab that? We're gonna put a blue gel on this one. So I'll show you the differences with the color grading versus actually doing it with a gel. So taking a look, first thing I can do is change the white balance a little bit, decrease the saturation a little bit. So taking a look, here's the before and after. But what I usually like to do that's a little bit more precise is the equivalent in Lightroom would be split toning. And what split toning means is that I add a specific color tone to the shadows, and I can add another color tone to the highlights. My magic color toning that I use to make things look more cinematic is that I cool down the shadows and warm up the highlights. So if you take a look at any superhero movie posters, or really any of the superhero movies, a lot of times you'll either see teal or blue in the shadows and yellow or orange in the highlights. The reason being, there's actually twofold. One of the reasons, of course, they end up being complementary colors. The warm and cool creates tension. And when it comes to color theory, any colors that are warmer come forward, and any colors that are cooler recede. They get less attention. So what that means is that the important parts, the face, comes forward and grabs your attention. You also do that with lighting, making it brighter. And then you just subtly pay less attention to the shadows by making them cooler. So taking a look, I'll just show you what you would do in Capture One. You can do this in Lightroom, maybe not quite as precisely, and you can definitely do this in Photoshop. So over here in Capture One, they actually have this tool that's called Color Balance. You see that on the left-hand side? And it gives you the color wheel, which is really nice because when you're color grading, you can visualize, oh, look, I see the blue across from the yellow, right? You can actually see it, then you don't have to reference a color wheel. What it allows you to do is you can select the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights and choose what color you want. And the further you drag the point out towards the edge of the circle, the more saturated it becomes. So it's actually pretty simple. So if I go here to shadows and I want them to be more blue, I want them to be a little bit more in that cyan. So see what it's doing? See how I added blue? And then if I go, I don't know if I want it blue, all you do is you drag it around the color wheel and you can see what different colors would look like. So it gives you a nice quick visualization. So I'm gonna add a little bit in this blue teal here. That was shadows. And now I'm gonna pop over to the highlights. And I said to make her come forward, get more attention, but also to have a healthier looking skin tone. I can go ahead and add some yellow and orange. So I'm gonna drag that little circle in the middle, and I'm gonna drag it more towards yellow-orange. See something maybe here. So to show you before and after of my color grade, it'd give me something kind of like that. Let me give it a little more contrast. Okay, so I'm thinking this would be where I'd end up. I'll show you the two side by side. Okay, something like that is how we would make it be over here a little bit more believable that I was actually on location. Okay, so that's how you can do it by actually doing it in post-processing and color grade. Let's switch over and see about changing this through light. This is a super blue gel. I think it's probably gonna be too much. Do you have a thinner one? If not, no big deal. Let's just see, or maybe this teal, because I'm looking, right? Like this looks like some of the colors I'm seeing in the background as well, so that might work. If you have a thinner blue, good. If not, no problem. So let's see. I'm gonna reset and take one more test. Okay. Thank you. Did you find a thinner one? I think you did. And medium. Let's test. Oh, and because this is really thick, the power is going to have to go up because the gel eats a lot of light. Let's see. So can you see the color in the shadows? So this is zero color grading at all. This is straight out of camera, and it already looks closer to what I was doing before. think it's pretty good. I'm going to turn it up just a little bit more. It's pretty nice. And then that gets a little bit stronger. I think halfway between those two is probably better. Let's test this. Let's see, I think that's pretty good. Yeah, so it's kind of in-camera color grading. If you wanted to go further and make it so that the face popped even more, Stephen, can you add a warm one to the main light? So we're going to take a CTO, color temperature orange. We're going to make it a little bit warmer on her face, which is the same thing we did in post-processing. But the reason I like this better, if I have a choice, is I'm actually assigning it to a light, whereas in post-processing, sometimes I make something warmer and it warms up a whole bunch of the photo, and then I have to go in and selectively adjust it. And the point is to get it in camera. So we'll add a little bit of this orange on there and get it in camera. You're doing great. Is that pose uncomfortable? You're doing good? Okay, good. That looks good, Stephen. And this time, can you feather it away from the background just a little bit? Because if it's really warm, I don't want it also hitting the background as much. I think it's on there pretty good. All right, let's see. Great, let's test it. See if I like it. Cool, let's do you have a thinner one? I think it's a little bit too orange, so I'm gonna have them switch to the thinner one. Although, I mean, if I were shooting maybe an album cover, like album art for somebody, this strong of color would be totally fine, but I want it to be a little bit more subtle. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. What's that? Okay, so the question was, does the exposure change on the main light? The exposure would change on the light with the gel, and actually most gels tell you how much light it's eating. So if you look, it'll tell you, oh, this takes up a quarter stop of light, a half stop of light, but I just make it look good. So it probably should go up maybe that last one, it should have gone up a third. This one's really thin. I bet you this is a quarter stop. Let's see. It should just be a tiny bit warmer instead of really warm. Yeah, so it's a little bit more subtle, not quite as orange. All right, so let's do one more shot. Will you give me more wind blowing? And I think that's it. Can you roll your shoulder this way? Perfect. All right, you got this, Stephen. Oh, that's perfect. And I'm shooting from a low angle because it's the superhero angle. And it's very, very empowering. As long as you're not close to your subject, it's not going to make their midsection look big, but it's going to make them look strong and elegant. Go ahead. Good, and then eyes at me. Perfect. Okay, great. So let me show you the comparison of the two shots, and we'll wrap it up. Let's do this one. I like this hair movement. I'm trying to see what your screen looks like. I'm going to desaturate it just a little bit. So this one is done with gels. And then I'll pick one up here, done with a little more color grade and white balance. And let's take a look at these two. So here's two different approaches to the same scene. So to summarize all of this, if you don't have the budget to take someone in an exotic location, or maybe you live in a really boring place, which I feel like we all kind of get used to where we live, you can transport your subject on location by doing in-camera compositing. So one more time, summarize the steps. Pick out your background, and if there is a direction of light in that background, consider that when you're planning the shoot. You can shoot the background yourself, or you can get it from a stock photo site. Then you have to print it out. You can either print it on a large format printer, or you can use a site like Kate Backdrop to print it out for you. And again, you're looking somewhere in the range of $100 to $200 for a background. From there, when you set up your scene, try to create depth, shoot at a narrow depth of field, and try to put something in the foreground and background of your subject to make it believable. And then match your lighting. That's going to be the quality of light, the direction of light, and the color of light. And then the finishing touches are in post-processing. And that's going to be with both your white balance and color grading. So This is the first time I've run through this presentation, so I hope you guys learned something and saw it was really fun. Oh, and thank you for joining me. If you guys have any more questions, I'm going to pop right over there on the other side of that column. I will stay however long you need, so bring your questions, and I look forward to chatting with you guys. Thank you.